The Realist movement emerged in France in the mid-19th century, as a reaction against the outdated strictures of academic art. Spearheaded by Gustave Courbet and Jean-François Millet, it signaled a definitive break from the artistic traditions of the past. Origins and influences. In the late 1840s, a circle of writers, artists, and intellectuals held regular meetings at a Parisian bar, the Brasserie Endler. The group's heated discussions covered a broad range of subjects, from radical politics and social issues to the latest artistic trends. They dubbed their meeting place the Temple of Realism, and it was this nickname which Courbet adopted for his art. Although they appear anything but revolutionary today, the paintings of Courbet provoked a storm of protest at the Salon, the state-sponsored exhibition in Paris, largely because they contravened normal academic practice. Scenes of rural life were expected to be small and picturesque, providing town-dwellers with a sense of escapism. The peasant pictures of Courbet and Millet, however, were large, on a scale that was normally reserved for major historical themes or religious subjects. Worse still, they focused on the hardship of modern working conditions, a topic that smacked dangerously of socialist politics to conservative critics. The Realists attracted equal scorn for their figures. Courbet's nudes had double chins and rolls of fat, while Honoré Daumier's workers were wizened caricatures. For critics accustomed to the idealized forms of academic art, this was not realism, but a deliberate quest for ugliness. Realism proved influential, not just for the style itself, but for the way that Courbet promoted it. His Pavilion of Realism at the World Fair of 1855 was a show of artistic independence, and a model for the later Impressionist exhibitions. See pages 340-41. La Rencontre, or Bonjour Monsieur Courbet. Gustave Courbet, 1854. With an air of self-confidence, the artist, Courbet, greets his patron Alfred Bruyas. The composition is based on a popular print of The Wandering Jew. Realism. Timeline. The Barbizon school thrived in the 1840s, when Rousseau and Millet settled in the area. Courbet burst upon the Parisian art scene in 1850. His work was controversial throughout the decade. In the early 1860s, Menzel painted scenes from modern life, while, in 1871, a group of Russians, known as the Wanderers, staged the first of their traveling shows. 1843, Corot, The Gardens of the Villa d'Est, Tivoli. 1849, Courbet, The Stonebreakers. 1850, Spitzweg, The Bookworm. 1857, Millet, The Gleaners. C. 1863, Daumier, The Washerwoman. Schools. As a coherent movement, realism is chiefly associated with France. Naturalist trends, however, were prominent in several European countries. French. Prior to the realist controversies, a number of landscape painters began working in the forest of Fontainebleau, close to the village of Barbizon. Although they are traditionally known as a school, the group did not have any formal links or joint manifesto. However, they did share a dislike for the artificiality of academic art, preferring to depict a more realistic version of the scenes that lay before them. The leading figures were Théodore Rousseau, Constant Troyat, Narcisse Diaz, and Charles d'Aubigny, although Camille Corot and Jean-François Millet were also associated with the group. The Impressionists would later cite them as an inspiration for their own movement. German. Courbet visited Germany several times, making a particularly strong impact in 1869, when he demonstrated his techniques to a group of young artists in Munich. His closest links were with Wilhelm Liebel, who worked with him in Paris for a time. Liebel's fascination with the style is most evident in his starkly realistic portrayals of peasant women. He also transmitted his ideas to a circle of German artists, who became known as Liebel's group. This included Hans Thoma, Karl Skutsch, Theodor Alt, and Wilhelm Trubner. Naturalist tendencies can also be discerned in some of the Biedermeier painters. Karl Spitzweg and Ferdinand Georg Waldmüller, for example, produced charmingly unaffected depictions of everyday life. Russian. In Russia, the baton of naturalism was taken up by an association of exhibiting artists, known as the Wanderers, or Itinerants. Led by painters such as Lyar Repin, Levin Kramskoy, and Vasily Surikov, they created a penetrating study of Russian society. Their range of subjects was very broad. Repin's vulgar boatmen and Nikolai Kosatkin's paupers collecting coal, for instance, were as uncompromising in their portrayal of manual labor as anything produced by the French realists. However, their work was not all contentious, and included atmospheric landscapes and scenes of daily life. Saint Nicholas delivers 3 unjustly condemned men from death. Ilya Efimovich Repin brought a fresh approach to the portrayal of historical subjects. He supported a campaign for the abolition of the death penalty in Russia, and here shows the saint saving 3 condemned men. 1888, oil on canvas, 215 by 196 centimeters, State Russian Museum, St. Petersburg, Russia. Old Elms and Prater. Ferdinand George Waldmiller. Waldmiller's work predates the realist movement, but his landscapes often display an almost photographic clarity that is reminiscent of the style of Corot. 1831, oil on panel, 31, 7x25, 9m, Kunsthal, Hamburg, Germany. Jean-François Millet. Bigrucci, Normandy, 1814. De Barbizon, 1875. Inspired by his observations of life on the land in his native Normandy, Jean-François Millet painted mainly rural scenes. His paintings were admired by realist artists and the young Vincent van Gogh. Having trained in Cherbourg and Paris, Millet spent his early career as a historical and portrait painter, achieving modest success. However, after the 1848 revolution and his move to the village of Barbizon, in the forest of Fontainebleau, he wanted to give his painting the social and political significance he admired in Daumier's work. He struggled financially for much of his career. He had a large family to support, but by the end of his life he was achieving recognition and honors. He was made a member of the Legion of Honor in 1868. After his death, his paintings became enormously popular. Lifeline. 1814, born into a prosperous peasant family in Normandy. 1832, moves to Cherbourg to study with local painters. 1837, studies with Delaroche in Paris. 1840, one of his portraits is accepted by the Salon. 1848, exhibits the Winnower, his first peasant scene. 1849, moves to Barbizon, near Fontainebleau. 1867, exhibition of his work at Paris Exposition Universelle. 1875, dies in Barbizon. The Gleaners. Millet often depicted peasants as noble, or even heroic figures. Here, the women picking up the leftovers of the harvest are invested with a monumental dignity. They are the focus of attention in the fertile landscape. 1857, oil and canvas, 84x 111 centimeters, Musée d'Orsay, Paris, France. The Angelus. Millet's most popular painting, it fetched a huge price soon after his death and was endlessly reproduced. Originally titled Prayer for the Potato Crop, it depicts a peasant couple pausing devoutly as the Angelus bell sounds the time for prayer. This is ostensibly a peaceful rural scene, but can be interpreted as having a more tragic subtext. 1857-59, oil on canvas, 53 by 66 centimeters, Musée d'Orsay, Paris, France. Closer. Juke. Praying hands. At first glance, the two figures appear united in prayer, but there is awkwardness between them. This is seen most clearly in their hands. While the woman's are tightly clasped in devout prayer, the man's betray his embarrassment as he self-consciously turns the rim of his hat. Honoré Daumier. B. Marseille, 1808, D. Valmondes, 1879. The satirical cartoons and caricatures that made Honoré Daumier famous in his own lifetime somewhat eclipsed his paintings and sculptures. These are now recognized both as fine examples of the realist genre and as pioneering the techniques of Impressionism. In 1816, Daumier's father made a disastrous move to Paris, and young Honoré was forced to find work. After a number of menial jobs, which shaped his left-wing politics, he learned the techniques of lithography, and he started to contribute cartoons to the journal La Caricature. For most of his life, Daumier struggled to make a living. He was admired by many fellow artists, including Corot, Degas, and Delacroix, but died in poverty. Lifeline. 1808, born into a family of artists in Marseille. 1816, family moves to Paris. 1822, produces lithographs to augment the family income. 1830 contributes satirical cartoons and lithographs to La Caricature. 1832 imprisoned for depiction of King Louis Philippe as Gargantua. 1835 works for Le Chivre. 1845 befriends arthritic Charles Baudelaire. 1871 becomes a member of the Paris Commune. 1878 renowned art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel exhibits his paintings. 1879 dies, virtually blind and dependent on financial support from France. The collector of engravings Daumier's post-1848 paintings are mainly keenly observed and unsentimental scenes of the Paris hackney. C. 1860-62, oil on canvas, 41x33 cm, Musée du Petit Palais, Paris, France. Radipal Daumier made a large number of sculptural heads and figures. In him he created the character Radipal, skinned rat, who represented the sinister agents of the government. C. 1850, bronze, height 38 cm, Musée d'Orsay, Paris, France. The washerwoman Daumier's choice of subject matter for his paintings places him within the realist tradition, especially his depictions of everyday life in working-class Paris. Yet his paintings also display a spontaneity and handling of light that anticipate Impressionism. C. 1863, oil on panel, 49 by 34 cm, Musée d'Orsay, Paris, France.